Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good folks. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Listen, I've been on the go, been traveling. I just spent a week in West Africa, in Ghana, in fact, in Accra and Kumasi. Life-changing. I'm going to get into that in just a few moments. But, from time to time, I want to read reviews about the podcast because it motivates me. And I just wanted to share it with you. Someone wrote me, Ice Hockey 4 is what they go by. And they wrote a review for iTunes that just said, a must listen. Pastor G's authenticity, wisdom, and powerful stories and interviews have touched me deeply. The frank, intimate sharing has inspired, educated, and at times broken my heart. Then she says, parenthetically, broken it open. These are in all caps, real issues that open life's complexities beyond a soundbite or judgment and discern how to work as a true ally and not as a colonialist. That's powerful. That's really powerful. So listen, Ice Hockey 4, I appreciate that. Keep listening, keep sharing this information, because this is what we really want the podcast to do. We really want the podcast to educate and to think differently about the world. And I love the part that you said it's more than just a soundbite, true conversations where we're processing, and that allows people to come along on the journey. Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's so funny because, I'm in Wisconsin, and so I kind of talk about ice fishing and all this ice stuff. So it's interesting that someone that identifies himself as Ice Hockey 4 is writing about this. And so I'm excited. I was in Accra, Ghana recently, and let me just say this before I get into the background of it. I did a radio interview there, and I did a television interview because a few months ago, I hosted a group here in Madison, Wisconsin that was called the Visiting African Scholars. You remember I did an episode on them. Go back in the archives. You can find it just maybe about 7 or 8 episodes ago. But one of the gentlemen who was visiting America for a month is the business desk director for TV3 in Ghana. So he made sure that I got on TV3. They have 12 million viewers. And so they had me at the news anchor desk. I wasn't just sitting in a chair somewhere. They had me at the desk. And they also had me on a radio interview. And I got to talk a little bit about Black Like Me on the radio interview. And so 173, I might have said a different number earlier, 173 folks from Ghana downloaded it. Plus we got a bunch more from South Africa and from Egypt. So the motherland is following their son. And so I'm really, really appreciative about that. Okay, so this is 1619. The start of 1619 is the start of, wait, I'm so jet lagged, I'm getting my dates mixed up. This is 2019. But 400 years ago in 1619, the transatlantic slave trade began. And so being now that this is the 400th anniversary, people had some insight to look back and to find out, what have we learned from this journey? What resilience have we found? And what's the narrative? What do we want to say about this? The National NAACP, again, had the foresight to plan a Back to Africa trip, a pilgrimage, if you will, of African Americans who wanted to visit the motherland with other African Americans to experience that culture and to say, we're okay. We've been through a lot, but we're okay. And I found out about it. A friend mentioned it to me. They put me in touch with the foundation, and I was able to go with my wife and my daughter and my sister. And let me tell you, it was beautiful. It was opulent. It was fulfilling. It was affirming. It was black. It was black. It was black. And did I mention that it was black? I've been to South Africa 3 times, but there was something about standing on West African soil with all the flags and the pride and the strength that just was medicine to my heart. So there's a group that's called the Adrinka Group. I'm hoping to get the founder of that group on my podcast at some point, but they basically planned a trip for 250 Black folks. We basically chartered a South African airline flight out of Washington, D.C., flew direct to Accra. It's about 10 and a half hours. 98% of the plane was African American. In business class, 40 out of 42 folks were. It felt like frickin' soul plane. I've never flown anywhere at any time in my life where the majority of the plane was Black. And so just the experience of the flight was really powerful. So hats off to the NAACP, Derek Johnson and his office. Hats off to the Adrinka Group, Diallo Sumbry, who I hope to have on this show soon, his right-hand person, Miss Denisha. Just fantastic folks who put together a very thoughtful, a very culturally rich experience in West Africa that included not only city tours and medicinal garden tours, but also included a business summit in Ghana for African Americans to think about how we work together with our brothers and sisters, our family in Ghana to strengthen our economics. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So again, as I mentioned, some of these folks are going to be on the show down the road, but I just wanted to say that I love this opportunity. It was called the Year of Return. And if you have not yet done so, if you just go to the internet and just Google hashtag Journey with Alex G, just the letter G, Journey with Alex G, you can see photos, Instagram, social media posts and posts that I'm putting up. If you go to alexg.com, that's my website. Not only can you find my podcast there, but I have posted just my own reflections about the trip, because not only do I love doing the podcast, but I also love writing. And sometimes that's how I really process things. We've been back for, a week and 2 days. And my hope has been for the last 7-8 days is that no one would ask me how the trip was. Not because I didn't want to talk about it, but you never know when people really have the 20 minutes to listen to you go down that rabbit trail talking about it. And it just invokes so many emotions that it's hard to, in just one sitting, just to say, and then it was this, and it was this, and it was that. Because I think people want to know, was it fun? Was it good? Are you okay? But they don't necessarily know the details. And so for my Black Like Me podcast family, this is my first time that I really have just talked extensively, thought out loud, and processed some of the highlights and key points of the trip, because some of the key points weren't necessarily high, but they were significant. And so that's why I'm putting them in this category. So I just want to just talk about it, because it's been hard to describe the experience, but it's been a little bit. So I want to talk about it because it was too powerful just to have alone. Day one of the trip, and I won't do it day by day, but we met in DC because that's where we flew from. But we did some things while in D.C. that prepped us for the trip. For example, 250 of us went to Jamestown, Virginia before flying out to Jamestown, Accra in Ghana. And so what happened in Jamestown is that, the first ship of Africans, because they weren't slaves because they hadn't landed anywhere, but captured Africans, hit the shores of what would become America. I mean, keep in mind that when this happened, America was not yet America. It was still in the making, which is important to me because Black people, through our free labor, helped turn America into a superpower. Let me just say that right up front. And so it's so interesting to me when people have the audacity to say, well, you don't like what we're doing and you want to kneel, then just, leave America. We were here when many of these white folks arrived. We've been here for 400 years. We were here when it wasn't America, when it looked like Little House on the Prairie. And so I just need to put that out in the minds of white people who are listening and Black people who are uninformed or ill-informed. We didn't show up to an established country. We helped to make this sucker. And I don't mean that negatively. I've lived here my whole life, but we helped make this what it is. And so going back and seeing that was very powerful. To see some of the early colonial settlements, churches, building structures, the foundation of many is still standing. But it's where African Americans, that was our Ellis Island, that was our entry point into the United States on the shores of Virginia. Ironically, I'm doing my genealogy, and you know this if you're part of the Black Like Me family. My G family, the white G's, came from Wales, and they landed in Virginia also. So it's very interesting that this was this key entry point where differing groups of people would meet to be able to create my family line. And so that was a long ride, like 3.5, 4 hours to Jamestown, Virginia. But the planners of the trip wanted us to go back to see, where did this start on our shores? And then let's go back to the beginning. And that was really powerful. And so the other thing that stood out to me is when we landed. Again, we had a 10-hour flight, but the plane was comfortable. It was great talking to folks. Danny Glover sat right behind my wife. Like, my wife was in 6D, he was in 7D. And low key, cool. It was on our tour bus. We stayed in the same hotel. One night we were having dinner, me and my family and another pastor. We had an open seat, so he just sat there with us. I jokingly said, "Hey, Mr. Glover," because he's older, so I'm not going to call him Danny. I don't know him like that. "Hey, Mr. Glover, are you going to do a remake or a sequel to Angels in the Outfield?" And he just kind of went, "No, I'm not going to do a sequel, to Angels in the Outfield." Because I know people always talk to him about the Lethal Weapon series or Color Purple or Beloved, but I didn't know if people really asked him about Angels in the Outfield, so I had to kind of do that so he'd remember me. When we landed, the word that resonated with us was Akwaba. Akwaba, and that's a Ghanaian word that means welcome, come home, make yourself at home, put your feet up, eat, go in the refrigerator, take your shoes off. Akwaba, welcome. And when we landed in the airport, we were at the time we came through customs. There was no other plane, because if you've gone through customs, sometimes 5 planes landed at the same time, and then you spend a whole day in customs line. There was no one else in line. We arrived at early in the morning, and we arrived to drumming and dancing and signage. And as all 250 of us walked out the airport, these folks were singing and dancing and welcoming us. And I just got to let you know, that was powerful. However the Drinker group set that up, I think it's amazing. I thought the campaign of Year of Return was just for a Drinker group, but this seemed like a national campaign that West Africa, particularly Ghana, was reflecting on what had happened 400 years before that. And so it was just beautiful. We got whisked away right to a cultural event where there were village elders who were dressed in very traditional Ghanaian clothing. And they said, okay, when you arrive, they're expecting you. They know that our delegation is coming in. And so just shake hands with the elders. And so that was beautiful. We went to another one later that evening. It's called a Durbar. It was right on the Atlantic, right next to a slave castle right in Jamestown. And there must have been 30 elders, men and women, that are just seated in this long row. And the president was there that evening. The Ghanaian president came to address the festival, but also address our delegation. But as we shook hands one by one, these village leaders took our hands and looked me dead in my eye and said, "Welcome home." Not welcome to Ghana, not welcome to Accra, not welcome to Jamestown, not welcome to the motherland. They said, "Welcome back, welcome home." And so we went to learn about West African culture. We went to connect. I don't think I was ready emotionally to have Africa and its leaders welcome me back, because I think one of the things that African Americans have struggled with is, are we fully at home in America? And we know we're not at home in Africa because many of us have never been there. And so we have all these images in our heads that we learned in school or on television or watching or reading National Geographic. And so I think subliminally, many of us as African Americans are embarrassed about what we're going to see. Is it going to be dirty? Is it going to be, is it going to be a bunch of all the images that we've thought about, that we've learned from way back from the Tarzan series, if you're in the mid 50s like me? Is it uncivilized? Are people living outside in huts? And are we going to be embarrassed about that? Have we missed industrialization? But these folks looked us in the eyes and said, "Welcome home." One gentleman said to me, "You're in Africa now. Enjoy it." Which is almost like a breather, like a message to breathe. Don't just come with a tourist lens. Enjoy it. Look around to see what you take back home. Find your identity. Become affirmed. But don't just come here like folks who are not from here. Come here. Take it in. You're in Africa. He said, enjoy it. That touched me and messed me up on so many ways, because people said it and they meant it. there's some people that say, hey, make yourself at home. Hey, but don't sit on that couch. Hey, make yourself at home. But don't touch my dog. Make yourself at home, but don't you go in the refrigerator. But they said it like they meant it. A couple of other things that just really, really stood out. One, I have to stress the Ghanaian president came. That was just powerful to have you come and address our group. And then there was, again, dancing and speeches. But they just were so glad that we were there. At one point, we were visiting some village leaders in Kumasi before we went into the Cape Coast area. I'm still working on my geography and for some of those areas. But the gentleman who was filling in for the village chief stood up and said, he said the word Aquaba again, but he also said, I wish that you didn't have to leave. It's almost like you're at a family reunion and you meet new relatives. But to have someone say, welcome is one thing, but I wish you didn't have to leave. Like, who says that to their home guest? Who says that to their house guests? Who says that to people who are visiting? That just touched me deeply. It just touched me very, very deeply. Just that sense of welcome, because that disarmed us. Because I think every African American wants to know that when we return home, do we really know what home is? Do we really know where home is? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, Alex, do you really know where you're from? Do you know where you're from in Africa? How do you find out? But to have people understand that if you're a Black and American, you are West African. And so to know that and to have the folks who control culture, who shape reality, who make laws, to have them look you right in your eye and tell you welcome. My gosh, that was really, really powerful. There's a quote that a friend of mine, Professor Christy Clark Pujara, who teaches a U.S. Black History course for my would-be white allies here in Madison as a part of the work of Nehemiah and Justified Anger. But she makes this quote each year that she's teaching this class. She said, destroyed people don't create culture. Destroyed people don't create culture. If people are creating culture, they weren't destroyed. That's how you know people weren't destroyed or completely dispirited, because they're able to create culture. And, I've been told my whole life, you come from savages, so how can you have pride? Like, why wouldn't you be savage like in America? This is who you are. You are genetically inferior. And whether they say it that way, I know I'm being somewhat facetious, but the choice of images, the choice of words, all shaped that. And as African Americans, we were not groomed by mainstream society or educational systems to be proud of our African heritage. I remember the first images I saw of Africans were people with chains around their necks. So my first introduction with my past was that I had been enslaved. And, I'm a kid. I'm in 4th and 5th grade. So I think, well, we've been doing that since the beginning of time. But the other part of it is there were white students in my class. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. So there are white people there who are hearing at the same time that people who look like Alex had chains around their necks. And that's their origin. There was no discussion about who we were before that, what we did before that, or really what we've done since then. And so this imagery, and so I want to say to my white allies and would-be allies, look at what your children are learning and being taught. Because if you're having these images reinforced, guess what? You and or society is going to have to either deprogram that white child or deal with the undeprogrammed or the programmed white person. Because at an early age, supremacy is reinforced. Because we never saw white people with chains around their necks. We didn't see white people being barbaric. We didn't see white people eating each other and doing that kind of stuff, being, cannibals. We didn't see that stuff. We didn't see what the Norwegians and the Scandinavians did to each other. But we sure as hell saw pictures of Black people looking savage and menacing and a chain around their necks. And not because they were bad, but because they were wild and animal-like. And like a Mustang, we had to break them and train them for good so we can give them Christianity and faith and dignity and teach them to stand up tall and draw in their lower lip and learn how to wear clothes and all this kind of stuff. And so I saw culture. I saw celebration. I saw Black people on billboards, whether it's for TV stations, a car. I love this pulpy drink called Aloe King. But to see that advertised with Black people, I first was introduced to aloe drinks when I was in Korea a couple of years ago. But to see that all of this stuff, every billboard, there was not a single white person on a billboard. And reinforcing that sense of identity and beauty was just powerful. And so immediately I felt this sense of pride. I mean, and I got to tell you that like the drumming at the airport, my sister said, them drums called to me. I wanted to go drop it, like it was hot. I wanted to go up there and dance. There was something, it was such a culturally rich way of almost serenading a group of people who were returning home. I don't think you do that for tourists. It's like putting out a family food when someone's been gone a long time. If you've been on you've gone into military service, you're serving overseas, you come back home, someone's going to put out like your favorite foods. Because inside this home, we know that this is what you like. You like banana pudding. You like cornbread dressing. You like, collard greens. And so we're going to put your favorite food out there in front of you. It was like they put our favorite food out. They spoke to us. They met us with drums. And I just have to tell you, I needed that. I needed that so much. And so just seeing the cultural pride, the business summit that was held was sponsored by, I think, Echo Bank or Econo Bank. There's the African Bank. But to see banks run by Black folks, to see business centers where these Ghanaians are dressed in suits or traditional wear and they're having meetings in our hotel. The hotel was opulent. They had small coves where you could have business meetings, but they were made with this sort of branches and I guess you call it thickets that gives you some sense of privacy, but it brings in such a sort of the cultural and more rural aspects of Africa, but in a beautiful aesthetic. The way they brought that together was just fantastic. People around behind the counter, they were Black. The people serving, the managers, the hostesses. Now it's not unusual to see Black bell captains, but everyone just being Black and in leadership. The drivers were Black. It was just amazing. Once we got through the airport, we also, and the cultural events, we went to what would be equivalent to Parliament or the White House, but we were given special permission to stand in front of it because you can't just come and get that close to what's equivalent to the White House and take pictures. But again, they wanted us to feel welcome, that sense of Aquaba. I loved it. I really, really loved it. Another thing, I think I've gone through three things. Fourth, the evil of slavery and oppression and colonization and the desire to divide and conquer and keep us apart was very relevant. And so even the fact that Black people aren't sure of their place or their space in Africa, I'm sure if someone, I've got someone who works on my team and he's Polish. And I'm sure if he ever went back to Poland, he'd be wondering, okay, do I look Polish? Do I sound Polish? I don't know any Polish words. I know how to eat a few Polish foods. But the sense is not that you are separated from Poland and told that Poland doesn't like you. Poland didn't look for you. Poland's ugly, dirty, stupid. He could go back and probably do some ancestry stuff and find it. There was such a thoughtful, and I don't mean that in a kind way, but thoughtful process to tell Black people your motherland is ugly. It sucks. You should thank us regardless of how bad the treatment is here. It's so much better than running around topless with bones in your nose and throwing spears. And it almost creates this Stockholm syndrome mentality. I just wrote a piece that's called Stockholm Syndrome. And again, if you go to alexg.com, look under my blogs, it's posted there. But I wrote a very thoughtful piece about Stockholm Syndrome and the attempt to make us think that even though you beat us and raped us, you are more committed to our well-being than Mother Africa. Yeah, you need to follow that. You need to read that. My white allies, you need to read that piece and a couple of others that I put up because I think it's just very key. But not only were we taken and the land plundered, but I don't know what Africans were told about us, but we were told all kinds of negative things, and so it just made it hard to just to connect up. The next item is we went to the slave castles. All right, first of all, this is a misnomer because they were really slave dungeons. Wording is really, really important. So ask questions about why would you call a slave dungeon a castle? Like a castle signifies dignitaries, parliamentary procedures, governmental structures. But basically, this is like your city government sitting on top of a jail. But wait a minute. Many of our city county buildings or city buildings in America also have jails in them. So mayors and county executives go to work inside a jail every day. That's kind of interesting. But the misnomer is that these weren't castles. Castles are beautiful and they're museum-like. You want to walk around them, and they're, maidens in distress and kings are ruling. I heard this word today. It felt haunted. We saw where those who would attempt to fight for their freedom would use the chains around their wrists to choke their captors. They were put in a place to be starved. And I'm not going to go into all the details of this because I don't want to sensationalize that, because we know it. But there was a place where they were starved to death and dehydrated. There were quarters for men and women. The men were separated, and there was a line on the wall about 18 inches from the floor. And this gentleman, he's a tour guide, he's from that area of West Africa, said, you see the mark on the wall 18 inches up? Human waste piled up to that high in this place. In fact, you're standing on petrified feces. Black people died on the floors. They told us that once they captured people from the western coast and even inland a little bit, they would be chained and marched up to 300 miles. Those of you from the Midwest, that's to downtown Chicago and back. That's 90% of the way to Minneapolis from Madison. That's the distance from Chicago to St. Louis, thereabouts. They would march people barefoot in chains through the wilderness where there are crocodiles and snakes and God knows what else. And then separate these people from their families and put men in one area and women in the other areas. And conveniently enough, some of the slave captains had quarters or rooms right above where the women were kept so that they could open a door and point to that woman or that woman. That was someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's sister, someone's teacher, someone's healer, and at will pull her up and rape her. And this is all before they get on slave ships. This is what they're doing. So they have these structures that are built. We saw the cannons at Cape Coast. We saw some of the cannonballs. And, usually you do that to protect your land. The Portuguese weren't from West Africa. The Danes weren't from West Africa. The British weren't from West Africa. But they built these castles to protect themselves from other greedy Europeans for coming in and taking their gold from Gold Coast. And that gold was black people, black bodies, black muscles, black vaginas, black breasts, black dreams, black communities. They were protecting. They didn't want the enemy to come and get their stuff. I was fortunate enough to go to college with my mother. She returned to college with me when I was an upperclassman. And we both were African-American history majors. I was Afro-Am history and economics. She was Afro-American history and social work. And we were in a class with William Vanderburg. He was a white gentleman, as you might guess by the name Van de Burg. And he was the chair of the Afro-American history department. He was a brilliant scholar. I really, really liked and respected Dr. Vanderburg. But one day my mom, because she was an older woman, she was not a 19-year-old student, she raised her hand and she said, Professor Vanderburg, I'm tired of reading about all the stuff that was done to black people, that we were slaves. We were black people who were enslaved. Tell me about the mentality, the sick mentality of white people from Europe who would do this to other human beings. I was thinking, damn, that's my mama. She's sitting here and she's thinking she's been through too much. She remembers separate but equal. She remembers integration. She lived in Chicago when Dr. King lived down on 16th Street. This black woman raised her hand and said, yeah. They cut a hole in the ground and put pregnant women's bellies in it so that they could spank her and paddle her and not hurt the baby because that was new product that was in the making. She said, y'all have told me enough about what you've done to black people. Tell me about who did it to black people. And so that's what I want to say about the slave castles. I don't want to go on and talk to you about the stench, and there wasn't really any, or the eerie feeling. I don't want to sensationalize it because you all know that that's how it happened. There was a dungeon or a tunnel that took you from the dungeon to the point of no return. Once you walked through those doors, it was too late for mutiny, so they thought. And once you went through those doors, you never saw Africa again. You never saw children again. You never saw family again. And so what I just want to leave with you all is this, about this aspect. Tell me about the sickness of human beings, the sickness of their mentality, that people would do this repeatedly to folks. And let me just say this for the record, because I am a historian. Yeah. I know that black people sold black people into slavery. What people group has not done that? But what the West Africans did not know was what these greedy sons of bitches were doing to their children and their daughters and their wives on these ships, and what was happening in the new land. When they found out what was going on, they stopped trading with many of these folks. Then the Europeans supplied weapons to their enemies to take them out, because even on West African shores, you're going to play by the rules of Europe or you ain't going to play. And that stuff really happened. But you do not move 150 million Africans from Africa's shores by people just giving their enemies away. Someone went in and got those folks. They marched those folks. They sold those folks. They separated them from their families. They branded their folks. I'm doing what I said I wasn't going to do. They branded them, separated them, raped them. And this before they even got on boats. And so here's what I want you to think about. We don't have those structures. We don't have those strategies anymore. But when did people's minds change? When did Europeans or folks who were the colonizers, when did people start seeing black people as beautiful or equal or powerful or thoughtful? And so even though slavery doesn't exist in the form in which it did in 1619 and beyond, black men are still in chains. Black kids are still being told that you're not beautiful. Our bodies are still being monetized, whether it's through special ed or drug rehab or social services. We're still producing money that doesn't come back to us or our community. And so what I want you all to do is tell me, how do you feel knowing that, yes, I'm a descendant of one of those folks who left the shores of West Africa, but some of you are descendants of people who worked in West Africa on the slave ships or part of slave trading in the U.S. And if you're not a direct descendant, you've all benefited from it. Now, I'm not trying to point fingers, but I'm just trying to say, this is not my history, would-be white allies. This is not my history, white folks. This is our history. This is how America was built. This is our history. So please, if nothing else, listen to about my trip to West Africa, to Accra, Ghana, with new ears. I did not go there to find out just about my people. I got more information on your people and on how America was founded. And if our attitude towards blacks was what it was in 1619 and beyond, what has changed that? What has been our period of enlightenment? The election of Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey getting her own network, Black Pulitzer Prize winners, Hattie McDaniel and Sidney Poitier and Denzel Washington, Halle Berry and Whoopi Goldberg and Olivia Spencer, and Viola Davis getting Oscars. You know, is it Wilma Rudolph winning an Olympics? Is it Jesse Owens? Keep in mind, those are still entertainers, except for Barack Obama. We're still people who entertain white folks. And so I want you to think about this as a less dichotomized history. We are connected. We are interrelated. We are all America. And this is how it was founded. So what I want you to ask yourself and ask yourselves is, did you learn that growing up? Are your children learning that? Like right now, while you're listening to this podcast, is some well-intentioned white person showing your children images of people who look like me with chains around their necks? Are they telling your children that they were immigrant workers and they came to America looking for work and rape and brutality? Are your children understanding the ingredients of white supremacy that, again, has got to be detangled, dissected, and even deprogrammed 30 years from now? Because as long as white people allow white people to teach this stuff to their young white children and black children, we're producing more problems than we're solving. Y'all need to listen to me. My grandmother would say it like this: listen at me. This is not my history. I did not go there to find out where we were beaten and brutalized and raped. I can go outside and see that we incarcerate more black men than any other state on a per capita basis. Here in Wisconsin, I can watch brutality to unarmed black men. I can watch things that are being said by countries of African descent that we're shitholes. But shit doesn't shit in a hole. People shit in holes. And so if these places are shitholes, who shit in them? Who shit on them? Who shit around them? You don't get it from the toilet and say that's a shithole because you made it one. And so this is our history, people. My name is Alex G, and I endorse that statement. Colorization began there as well because some of the Portuguese slave traders were having babies by African women. Surprise, surprise. And so they didn't want to send their children on those slave ships because guess what would happen? They'd become slaves. But they knew they couldn't take those children back to Portugal. And you know why. Well, some of them did go back. That's why people in Southwest Spain and Portugal in the Mediterranean are dark. You don't think it's just because of the sun, do you? So they put these women, these Africans and their children in special houses right before you get to the slave castle. We walked from one of the tribal communal meeting places, but then there are these little bungalows, nice looking houses on both sides of the road. And so people who have gone ask, what are those houses? What are those houses? The Portuguese slave traders who didn't want their children to go back with them to Portugal or go to America, they gave them special housing, hence starting the beginning of colorization. We blame this on black people, but from the early days, the light-skinned, biracial, half Ghanaian, half Portuguese children grew up in a different surrounding, different environment, different benefits because their fathers were white and they had straighter hair and leaner noses. And so some of those practices follow to America where you have your field, you know what, in your house, you know what, but we didn't create that. So don't get me on an interview and say, now, isn't it true that sometimes there's a differentiation between light-skinned blacks and darker blacks? Yeah, we bought into it, but who started it? Because all of our children were black. All of our children were black. All of our babies were kissed by the sun with beautiful, tightly woven hair. And it was white European blood that infiltrated all of that and made a distinction. Don't mess with me, people. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take this show to another level. The other point is when we're in a slave dungeon, I'm not going to call it castle anymore, slave dungeon, The founder of AfricanAncestry.com, her name is Gina Page, Dr. Gina Page. I'm hoping to have her on the show soon. Dr. Gina Page is the co-founder, the only executive and co-founder of any of the major DNA companies that's led by a woman of color. So she flew with us because even though we were in Africa in early August, we took DNA tests back in June and mailed them to her company. So while we were there in the slave dungeon, she made this powerful statement. She broke a little bit and cried, and she said, listen, from this place and where we were in Cape Coast, as I said earlier, was the largest processing plant for slaves being sent off to the New World in Western Africa. She said they stole our language. They stole our bodies, our children, our wives, our relationships. They stole our leaders. They stole our kings. They stole our royalty. They stole our gold. They took everything from us but our DNA. But our DNA. And she's saying, we have found a way to compare your DNA with over 100,000 folks from various cultures and parts of West Africa, so we can, with great specificity, tell you where you're from. And so I was in this group. You're all anticipating where you're from. My group was called up, and we're from Guinea-Bissau. Now there's a Guinea in West Africa, but Guinea-Bissau is bordered on the north by Senegal, and then it's a coastal community, and Cape Verde is right off of it. And so with the Portuguese influence, you begin to understand why people who settled in South Carolina, who were called island folks or Gullah folks or Geechee folks, they came from that particular region. It's a small country. My sister and I and my family, we want to go back. We want to go back and visit it. We didn't get a chance to get there. We want to explore and spend more time in West Africa. But I found out that through my mother's lineage that we are from Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau is spelled Bissau, and they're known for resistance. And that helps me to understand my daughter, my sister, my mother, my grandmother a lot better. But I love knowing that. I'm in the process of tracing my father's lineage to find out what part of West Africa he's from. But it was empowering, folks. I'm 55 to have no idea what part of Africa I'm from. And then through the accuracy of DNA testing to find out that DNA that I have in my mother's lineage are centralized to this region that's called Guinea-Bissau is very powerful, very powerful. People were amazed because we knew that we're from Africa, but between the aquaba of having the leaders look at us in our eyes and say, welcome, and then having DNA physiological proof that we were stolen, that we had a home, that we had a land and a language and culture and food and dreams. It's just, it was, to say just merely renewal would be an understatement. To explain this trip like it was a trip to Wakanda would marvelize it. It would sort of trivialize it because it's real and not make believe. But to know that there's a home caused me to realize how homeless I felt. Now I want y'all to hear me. It does not mean that I don't belong in America. But until I stood in place where people look like me, even though they're very different, even in Africa, we are not a monolith. But to know that there's a home, that there's a place where we didn't have to put on, I'm going to use the word that my grandmother would say. Those of you with older black parents would know this, and probably white people would know this too. Didn't have to put on airs. To know where you're from gives you a sense of rootedness. And I write about this in one of my blog posts. I don't know if these are called essays or whether they're called prose, but I have 3 up on alexg.com under blogs that you must read. You must read. Raw reflection on what I thought or what I felt. So I want to say to Dr. Gina Page, I hope you're listening to this. I want you to come on my show, but I appreciate your work because your research and not selling or sharing our information, but reminding us as Black people that everything wasn't stolen, that everything was not stolen, that in addition to the Adinka group and NAACP giving us a voyage, an opportunity to journey, to pilgrimage back to the motherland as a big group, was beautiful, was powerful. To feed us West African food was powerful. To put us in opulent hotels was powerful. But to remind us through DNA that we were indeed back home was Christmas and birthday and anniversary, and it was all of that wrapped up to remind people who are at the height of their careers, who still at times don't feel fully at home or fully safe or fully represented or fully protected, to come to a place and realize there is somewhere where I didn't have to put on airs. I didn't have to explain what I came from. It's just, it leaves me speechless, and I don't find myself there very often. I got a chance to ask a gentleman, a tour guide, do you ever think about us? Did you learn about slavery in school? He goes, of course. And I said, so how do you all picture us? How do you think about us? And he said, we mourn for you. He said, but when you've come back, we say Akwaba, because you could be my uncle, you could be my cousin, but you coming back, the ancestors coming back home through you is very powerful. I never thought about how the Africans, the West Africans, the Ghanaians, the people from the West Coast, the Gold Coast thought about us. I'd never really thought about that. In my radio interview and my TV interview on TV3 in Ghana, I was asked about the plight of African Americans in America, and if I thought that they were in part responsible for the image, which is a very interesting question because there's still some separation because they're Ghanaian and we're Black from America. And I said, we are to an extent, but being back on the West African shores reminds me of the trauma. Whether you want to look at it historically, emotionally, epigenetically, you can't take people through what African American people have been through, from Africa to becoming Americanized, through the transatlantic slave and that slave trade and that passage. And you can't experience the trauma of being captured, beaten, marched for hundreds of miles, separated from your family, branded, put in dung-filled dungeons, given your last bath. I stood at the last bath river. It's called Slave River, where they got their last bath before they were oiled down with coconut oil, and then the European traders could pick them like it's meat at a market and then march to ships. I saw those places. You can't then put them on a boat for months and stack them like cargo and let them continue to live in dung and waste. And the ones that were sick, throw them overboard to the point where sharks followed slave ships because they knew that there would be good eating. And then there were those who threw themselves overboard too because they wanted to rescue themselves. Then you land on American shores and experience everything we experienced here. You can't do that and not have some repercussion. So yes, we are responsible for our actions. But some of these perceptions, because we're now far enough away from Africa and knowledge of Africa, that I think our children and people are feeling the impact of homelessness and an increased sense of not belonging. That yes, we are responsible for pulling triggers and robbing people and doing these kinds of things. But there are laws that make us more susceptible to jail and imprisonment. There has been a history of redlining that makes us more susceptible to slums and projects. That yes, we as Black people are responsible for who we are and individual actions we take. But you must also understand the impact of the slave trade, which those who remained in Africa didn't experience. And so there's a trauma that we have not yet processed. We have not yet fully been given a language, because how does a fish describe water? How does a bird describe air? How do you describe something that's always been in your gills, under your wings, in your system? And so, yes, but let's talk about those that rise above it. Let's talk about those who, in spite of it, are doing well and want to bring others up. But let's also understand that there's some systemic reality that has built this kind of subculture that we all have to work on and work against. And then the last point 10, was we were invited to have an economic impact on West Africa. Vacation here, purchase land here, live here. I never thought that I would seriously have a conversation with my wife about what retirement could look like in West Africa. But when I saw homes overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, Black-owned businesses, expats, Black teachers who are retiring to Ghana, Black people moving their young families to Ghana, and experiencing the rich culture and the rich and the resources and it's about ready to grow and boom. They're building high-rise luxury condos, and I just thought, I've never imagined that I could really spend part of my retirement in West Africa. But I interacted with a friend who's a professor here in the state of Wisconsin, who spends a couple of months there, and his place was beautiful, and the view was beautiful, and the community was beautiful, and the people were beautiful. And he talks about how the community cares for itself and protects itself. And so the idea of African American people joining resources to do good, African and African American people, is just, man, that's astonishing. That's mind boggling. Let me just say this. I don't have 11 written down. But let me tell you something that was really interesting, to see African leaders through the eyes of African people. For example, President Kwame Nkrumah became the ruler of Ghana, Ghana's king, in 1961, I believe, after British relinquished control. He had been the prime minister, then became the king. He said it's not enough for Ghana to be free. Ghana was the first African country to take its independence from Europe. He said all of Africa must be free, and we need to establish the United States of Africa. Now, he was in that role for 5 years, and in 1966, his government was overthrown. But the tour guide said to us, after sealed documents had been unsealed, the CIA in the United States of America had a hand in the overthrow of his government. Now, I'm just telling you what they told us on the tour. I'm going to be researching this, but I tell you what, I believe it. Come on. FBI, CIA, have we not done similar things on American soil? I hope I don't get my podcast revoked from saying this, but I'm going to say it. This is what they told us. We saw the home of W.E. Du Bois, and pictures of him with General Mao. Pictures of him. Du Bois was going to China in the 1930s. Who was going to China in the 1930s? A Black leader, an academic, key player in the Niagara movement, which gave life to the NAACP and all of these. He was going to China. I saw pictures of President Nkrumah with Mao. I saw a picture with him with Fidel Castro. I saw a picture of him with Kennedy. In fact, there's a car at the museum for President Kwame Nkrumah that was given to him by President Kennedy. I also saw a picture of President Kwame Nkrumah in a black tie dancing with Queen Elizabeth. And the date underneath the photo was 1961. Interestingly enough, the same year that British stepped out of Ghana. They were dancing. This is before To Serve With Love and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and Sidney Poitier. And in 1961, I saw pictures in W. Du Bois' home of Muammar Gaddafi. I don't have enough time to go into that on this show. But the way that folks in Ghana viewed that former leader in Libya is a lot different than what I was told about Gaddafi through American news and American lens. So I love being in other places because I love hearing their news, their stories, and their history, because it's not quite the way we tell it. And they might have different political persuasions, but they were all African and African leaders, and they were tired of being raped by white colonizers, white Christians, white churches, white denominations, and white countries. And when they stood up against them and said, we want our own oil, our own gold, our own diamonds, somebody wreaked havoc on them. So listen. The message I bring back home from Africa is resilience. The message I bring is resilience. I gave you some of the details because I know many of you have been following me or can still follow what I posted through hashtag Journey with Alex and the letter G. You can see my blogs that I've written and posted on alexg.com. If you subscribe on alexg.com, you'll get a reminder about my podcast and my blogs when they're posted. But the word is resilience. What I want to talk about is resilience. I want to talk about how Black people took control of Black people. They took care of Black people. They took solace in Black people. They took pride in Black people. And listen, when I talk about all of this, it doesn't make me anti-other. But when I'm talking about white power and influence, I'm talking about all the things that motivated, all the things you just heard me talk about. Don't you ever listen to another story about West Africa slavery and think, poor Black people, without thinking about what evil got into the minds and hearts of people who thought they could do that to people. Then get in an imaginary boat from West Africa and just go right across the Atlantic and land on American shores and ask yourselves, when was the reset button hit or pressed that now we see people differently? Because we saw them differently with 12% of the population really do all the stuff that it's doing. There are more white people on welfare than Black people. But why is the thought that the welfare recipient is a Black mom with 5 or 6, 18 kids? Why is it that white people do drugs and crime as much as Black people? It's been proven statistically, but when you think of an inmate, when you think of a sex offender, when you think of a drug dealer, you think about somebody who looks like me. Do you know how many Black boys have lost their lives or spent their childbearing years behind bars for selling and possessing weed? And now you have white men in white coats growing organic hemp. They're going to shows like Blue Velvet or something, like where people are racing horses and dogs and having these flower shows, that they're actually showing off their weed. When Black people went to prison for that, they went to jail for that. All that just do your homework, do your history, do your background check. Just it got people in the system that got them documented and started the paper trail and blah 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 and blah 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 blah. Now it's legal and it's cool and it's making white people rich and it's giving money to the Colorado school districts. But when Black people were doing it, we went to jail. White people are growing weed and they go into the bank. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Listen, this is Black Like Me. You want to understand America and the world through a Black person's lens, you're in the right place. Don't scoot back because you disagree with something I say. Lean even closer. More importantly, share this with somebody who needs to hear it. I'm proud of my African heritage. I'm proud of my West African heritage. I'm proud to be from Guinea-Bissau. I'm glad to find out where my father's from. Will I move to Guinea-Bissau? Will I learn Portuguese? Probably not. But will I visit it? Probably so. Will I study it more? Probably so. Will I really look at land in West Africa? Outside in Ghana, Kumasi? Very likely. I need a little space in my life where I don't have to translate, I don't have to justify, and I don't have to dumb down. And if I can get some of that in me a couple times a year, I can become more effective, more sane, and healthier here. And I think everybody would benefit from that. You all, this has been a very thought-provoking and somewhat heavy, but very cathartic episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. West African like me, Dr. Alex G. But I'm so glad that you all have journeyed with me. And Ice Hockey 4 and others continue to listen. Folks in West Ghana continue to download. Folks in Egypt, and keep listening. And again, I know I said it before, North Dakota, South Dakota, West Virginia, thank you all for joining the family. You all were the holdouts, and now the whole country is listening to Black Like Me. Looky here. If my ancestors could see me now. Thank you all for your partnership. Thank you for those of you that are part of the Patreon family. Click the links below to see my photos, to get to my blogs. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. Help me tell the story of what it's like to be Black like me. Listen, learn, change, share. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, Black like me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.